Okay, so I have one of my exterior panels with my handle on it. The other one's got the pockets on. I didn't put pockets on both sides, just on one side. And I've got my piece of super stiff interfacing. Now I'm using, this is a sort of a heavyweight woven buckram type fabric that I buy from a supplier in the UK. I've made one with Peltex, I've made one with Decoville, so Decoville heavy, so both will work just as well. The reason I'm using this is because I can get it, it's reasonably cheap, and I've got some. So basically what you need is a heavy weight interfacing. Now if you choose not to use it, you can actually leave it out, but the weight of the dies in the pockets can sometimes pull the outside down so it looks slightly crumpled. So this just gives an extra layer of stability. And you can use any nice heavy weight, so Peltex or your what's it called, Decoville heavy, or even 2 layers of Decoville light would work. I'm sure there are other heavyweight interfacings, but these are the ones that I'm familiar with, so this is what I'm advising. So you have your piece of heavyweight interfacing. Now if it's fusible, then you can fuse that on. If it's not, you can use a little bit of woven, a little bit of spray adhesive, which is what I've done, to hold it in place. And you'll find that it sits slightly inside of the, it's got a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around the outside, so it's slightly inside of the outline. Take your lining panel, whether that's got pockets on it or otherwise, and lay it right sides up on top. So you've made a sandwich. So you've got your foam and your stiff interfacing layered up inside, and then you have your lining panel right side up and your exterior panel right side down. I'll just show you in a minute. And we're just going to clip those together, making sure all the edges match. Okay, let's just pop another couple of clips in there. Just adjust it if you need to make sure that your lining is sitting directly over the top. Then I'm going to turn it over because I'm going to base stitch from this side. That means I don't stitch through my handle, which, yep, I've done that. So just be careful. And I'm going to base stitch around the outside at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. You can repeat the same process for the other side. So both sides will have a layer of the super stiff interfacing if you choose to use it. But if you don't, then just add your lining fabric so that you're making a sandwich with both the lining and exterior fabrics facing outwards. And then baste around the outside to make sure that they stay together. The very bottom of your pocket lining, and I usually trim off my additional seam allowance. I forgot to do it this time, but the very bottom of your pocket lining may well catch in your basting stitch, and that's absolutely fine. It just means that when you pull anything out of the pocket, it's not going to pull the inside of the lining of the pocket out. So don't worry if you're catching the bottom of your pocket. Again, it really depends on your accuracy of measurements. If you actually measure absolutely correctly and position absolutely correctly and trim off the additional seam allowance, you'll find that the pocket doesn't go into the basting. But I think all of us make occasional millimetre or 1/8 of an inch errors to our cutting. Tiny little bit of lining that's just poking out around the edges there, which I need to get rid of just because it'll bother me. I obviously didn't cut that very well. That's what happens when you cut with scissors. Couldn't find my rotary cutter. So I cut it with scissors. There we are. Look. So now I have my lining attached to the back part of my side panel, and you can see that that's got suddenly quite stiff. So that's all good. Let's carry on, shall we? We'll carry on with this video rather than starting another. So here's my other lining panel, and I've already attached my lining, my side panel, and I've already attached my lining to it. I'm now going to take my gusset. Now this is the gusset that I've already put my binding to, and I'm going to, from this top corner, so I'm looking at this corner here, I'm going to lay, what am I going to do? I'm going to lay my, having a moment, I'm going to lay my side panel directly on top, so it's wrong sides together, so the two lining pieces on top of my gusset panel, and I'm going to match up that long side, and I'm going to stitch, I'm not going to stitch, I'm going to clip it really well. This is a point where you're going to need a lot of clips. So with our gusset right side up, I've got it's a thread here. When we get down to this bottom corner, what I'm going to do is I'm literally going to pinch the corner where my fabric is, and I'm going to bend my gusset around that corner as closely to the corner as I possibly can, and I'm just going to clip the other side. Now what you end up with is this. So you get this kind of fin, if you like, and I find it's easier and it keeps things in place better if I actually clip that fin. So I'm going to come along the bottom edge, again clipping as I go, and then when I get to this other corner, I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to kind of hold that very corner of the two pieces. So I'm holding the lining, the side part and the gusset part right in the corner, and I'm just going to swivel that, she says with great confidence, swivel that corner round, and again it's going to make that fin. I'm just going to clip it in place quickly so that it doesn't come undone as and again I've got that fin. It's not quite as prominent as this one because this one is the sort of the full height, whereas this one, it's only coming up here a couple of inches. But I'm just going to kind of clip that. It just helps to hold it in place. So making sure your handles are out of the way, you are going to stitch from the top corner where you've got your piping, your binding, all the way down to the bottom, and I'll stop stitching a 1/4 inch away from the very bottom, and I'm going to do the same kind of thing as I did with the binding as with the bottom corners. So I'm going to move this fin out of the way, I'm going to stitch down this way, I'm going to move the fin up, and then I'm going to stitch across. So you're kind of moving that part so that you can stitch, but you're stopping stitching 1/4 inch away from the very bottom here. So I'm just going to kind of show you. And our seam allowance is 1/4 inch. Keep your stitch length quite small because this is structural now. So we're going to, oh, that's not what I meant to do. We're going through quite a lot of layers, so you may well need to pop in a slightly larger needle. Take it slowly. A 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure that the handles are out of the way because you don't want to stitch over those. Back stitch stitching a little bit, and I've now stitched all down that one long side. So I'm coming to the bottom edge, and I'm just going to move that fin out of the way, and I'm going to start stitching right at the beginning from quarter of an inch seam allowance. And doing it like this should get you nice neat corners on your bag. I'm going to stop stitching a quarter of an inch away from the very corner. Back stitch a couple of stitches, and the same thing again. I'm just going to move that fin out of the way so that I can stitch along this short edge. Go. Now I can remove the clips from my fins, and you can see that what we've got is a really nice kind of sharp looking corner on our base. So we're going to do exactly the same thing with our second panel. So I find it's easiest to have the whole thing sitting like that. And I know that that's going to go like that because I know this is the outside. So I'm just going to, you can kind of almost position it in place. And again, carefully clipping, matching that top corner on that curved edge to the top of the binding edge on the gusset, and clipping in place. When you get down to that bottom corner, you will still have, you have that fin, but it's not quite as obvious because you've got the thingy attached on the other side attached on, but it's still there. It's just a question of moving it about, and you can still manipulate this even though it's got that stiff interfacing. So don't be afraid; it will come back to shape if you manipulate the fabric to get those corners. Now the easiest way to tell if you've got this right is to check here to make sure that you've got exactly the same. It's nice and straight across that front that gusset is nice and even. You've got the same measurement on both sides, and I'm not going to tell you what that measurement is because for every one of you there will be an 1/8 of an inch, maybe even a 1/4 inch difference, depending on how tightly you've done your binding, depending on how accurately you've cut. So there's no right or wrong measurement. What you need to make sure is that this measurement here to this measurement here is the same as this measurement here to this measurement here. If it's not, then refit your side and just ease it round so that it does end up being the same, because it's important that the thing looks even. So you can see now we have our second side clipped in place, and I'm now going to stitch it, except for I'm going to do it from the other end. I'm being rather stupid now, sorry. Completely forgotten what I'm doing. So I'm doing it from the shorter end this time, making sure that I start and making sure that I pull that fin out of the way. So I flattened my bag to get that fin. And I'm just going to stop 1/4 of an inch away from the bottom corner. And then I'm going to take that fin and I'm just going to push it out of the way. You can see I'm kind of just manipulating the bag. Then coming along this bottom edge. Off my 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm just going to go back a little bit and come back forwards. And this far corner I'm pushing down so that I've got that fin out of the way. All the way along the bottom, stopping 1/4 inch away from the end. And then you can see I'm just going to lift that fin up and out of the way. It does take a little bit of manipulating. I'm starting right at the very edge. I'm going to come all the way. As with all bags, don't be afraid to move your fabric. You are in charge. It is not. This is something that needs to bend to your will rather than the other way around. Okay. Let's just trim off me threads, which just drive me insane. I don't think it's helping that my lining fabric is a cotton mix rather than 100% cotton. It's the only pink that I had. And it's lovely to work with, but it does fray like a, well, it just frays. It frays a lot. So I've got lots of threads that are not actually threads per se. They're actually from the lining fabric fraying around the outside. So there we go. We have what looks a bit like it might actually be a press bag. So now you're going to take your front flaps and you need to decide, not at this point whether you're going to have them left over right, but which one you want on which side. If you've got a particular design that you want to have a particular way, you can see it kind of matters not. So we're going to take the bottom straight edge of our flap and we're going to, on the side that's appropriate, so the straight edge is going to be adjoined, we're going to match it up so it butts up against, let me just see if I can pop that one and show you, so that the bottom edge of the flap butts up against the binding on this bottom part of the gusset. So you need that butted up as close as it can go. Don't overlap it, just butt it up. Let me just, and then we're going to clip from that bottom edge all the way around to the top. Now these flaps do not go right to the top corner. Let me just put a few more clips in and then I can show you that. You need plenty clips for this, just to make sure that everything stays put. So you can see that the flap comes, there's a gap, and that's to allow your handle for your press to stick out the top of your bag. So having got that in place, I'm just going to pull my handle out the way and I'm going to stitch it in place around that top edge using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You might have to scrunch your flap up to get round, so that it's, because it's quite thick. But don't worry, scrunching is not a problem, it will come back. So that's one of your front flaps on. And then we're going to do exactly the same with the second one. Again, lining up. So I'm going to put them lining sides together, lining up with the binding on that bottom gusset so that it sort of butts up to it. And then clipping carefully, easing it round that curve. It will be quite stiff because you've got a stiff interfacing in the side panels, so, and there's a lot of foam here, and I'm using decent foam, so this is Styleville. I wouldn't necessarily advise using headliner, the thin headliner for this. I think it probably would be a tad thin. If that's all you've got, then you probably could use it, but you'd have to add extra fusible stabilizer, I would feel. For my personal peace of mind, I would expect you to use something a little bit stronger. So there's our second one in place, and I'm going to move my hand out of the way and stitch this one down. Oop. Yeah, any of the specialist foams used for bag making will work for this. So your Biani Soft and Stable, your Bosal, Styleville, Flex Foam, is it Pellon Flex Foam? Although Flex Foam is just a little bit lighter, I find, it's not quite as gutsy. Any of the above would work. And if you wanted to use the fusible, then you could do. I'm not a great fan of fusible, but it's not gonna do a great deal of harm to this one, I think. Yeah, I don't know. The headliner that we are currently able to get in the UK is actually quite thin. It's only about 2 millimeters thick. And my inclination would be to say, if you're going to use headliner, to actually use a double layer. I haven't tried it, so don't quote me on that, but to use a double layer would probably give you enough thickness. So there we have, our front flaps are now in situ, and they, whilst they don't sit perfectly on there because it's not got any poppers and stuff in it, once it's, I'm trying to put my hand inside to show you. Once it's got poppers or snaps or whatever, it will all sit nicely, so that they'll be nicely kind of covered, if you like. So that's the main exterior part completed, apart from our binding. So I'm going to come back to you and show you where we go with binding. I'm not going to do a video of me doing the entire binding because you will be absolutely asleep before the end of it. So I'll show you how I fit my binding, and then how I hand sew the binding. If you choose to do it by machine, then that's fine. That's very much up to you. Then we're going to put the snaps onto our pockets. We're going to put the snaps onto our main panel, and then we'll make our base.